at 345 East Shepherd Lane for Kyle Montgomery.
What we've got is a gentleman named Kyle Montgomery. He lives at home with his parents. He's 21 years old. He likes to he wants to set up a little small business, and he repairs off-road vehicles, Jeeps, ATVs, and installs off-road parts and accessories. What he explained to me is he'll be working on four-wheel drives, or 4x4s, Jeeps, and installing off-roading parts like bumpers, winches, lift kits for for Jeeps, things like that. And he has a garage on the back of his father's place. They live on an acre. It's secluded with trees in the front. You can hardly see his house. He's got a fence around the three sides where he's going to be working. And he will be working on one car at a time. He told me he'd have no more than 2 cars in line behind it, so he'd have a total of 3 if ever on premise. He is going to I guess that's about it. He will help me out.
So this is an item where the Planning Commission received some correspondence where there had been some regional concerns with the neighborhood, and partly egg on my face and some. We had advertised it originally as a major home occupation, but it is in fact an A1 agricultural property, which allows an agricultural home occupation. So applicant comes in and asks, and we say, yeah, based on your property, you can do this, and we just labeled it wrong, and so we were able to correct that. But based on that, it sounds like at least that particular some of those items were resolved, and I believe you would have seen the subsequent and follow-up email on some of those concerns. Based on our conversation, we've been able to verify everything seems to be in compliant with the minimum restrictions of the ordinance, and we're recommending approval without the need for additional conditions. However, as the Planning Commission, should you find there's a nexus and need to impose conditions to mitigate impacts, you're welcome to do so. He was aware of the meeting this night. I don't know if he's here in the audience, but we'd be happy to try and answer any questions if you have them, if he's not.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant here tonight? No, okay. Well, it seemed like to me the one concern would be, and it was addressed, would be the visibility of having the extra vehicles around. And I've been by the property and seen it, and looked like it would be pretty hard to see anything from the street. Maybe from the back church parking lot or something, but is that right?
That's what when I went and looked, that's what I thought too.
Yeah, I thought so too. Okay.
That's what I thought too.
Any other concerns or items to discuss, or should we take a motion? All right, I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for an agricultural home occupation, off-road vehicle and 4x4 repair and accessories for Kyle Montgomery at 345 East Shepherd Lane.
Second.
Aye.
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 Great. Thank you. All right, next, item 3, conditional use permit for major home occupation B, swim lessons at 2137 South, 100 East for Dave Austin.
All right. Dave Austin lives on the back of a cul-de-sac. He was at 2137 South, 100 East. His daughters want to teach swimming lessons. They're going to be mostly one-on-one, sometimes 2 or 3 at the most. They're gonna be in business hours, excuse me, from 9 a.m. till 11 a.m. Monday through Fridays. And he says that, I told him to pick a number that the most that'd ever be there, and he said 8, so that's the most that they had ever had there at one time. We recommend that they approval of the proposed conditional use permit under major home occupation B, subject to compliance is with no conditions other than the number of students is limited to 8 per class.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion or questions?
I just know traffic's always an issue for people, especially where it's in a cul-de-sac. Did you talk to them about that at all, or?
He said that most of the kids that'll be taken are neighborhood kids. He says he's not saying that there won't be traffic, but he says his kids, just for their peace of mind, will only be teaching probably 2 or 3 at the most, so that they take good care of the kids, so they're not worried about other problems. And so he says he shouldn't see that much traffic. He said a session will last a half hour, and they might be able to fit 2 or 3 sessions in a day, but he doesn't see it getting to be more than 1 or 2 cars every, half hour.
So they're not planning on having multiple sessions with different instructors?
No,
or
they'll just
anything
have
like
a
that?
session and have a session and
Okay.
so.
Okay.
Okay, great. I'll take a motion. Ready?
I'll make a motion to approve conditional use permit for major home occupation B, group swimming lessons for Dave Austin at 2137 South 100 East.
I'll second it.
Start us off.
Aye.
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 Great, thank you. Next, conditional use permit for a development sign, extension of it, for Henry Walker Homes at 352 North, 75 East.
This sign is on Crestwood Road. It is 352 North, 75 East. It's for that house right there. There's a subdivision right across the street from our park there that they stubbed 5 or 6 houses in. The last 2 houses are not sold yet, so they want to leave the sign up. It's been there a year. They filed for a request to keep it till the houses that are left are sold, or 6 months, whichever comes first. And the sign is 4 by 8. It's approximately 8 foot tall, and I measured it, and it's out of the 30-foot triangle for sight from the corners. I see no problems with that issue or anything. So staff recommends that we allow them to have it for another 6 months, or till the houses are sold, whichever comes first.
Great, thank you. Any discussion, questions?
No problems with the sign, Lyle? Or?
Yeah, we've not received any concerns or complaints to date that I'm aware of.
Okay.
How many times can they get an extension on the original 1 year?
It's up to the planning commission, so I don't believe there's a limitation. We've done some that are pretty substantial in the past.
Okay.
It does say for periods of 6 months, but I think the planning commission's taken some interpretation on the past 2 and sometimes gone even beyond that when it's a larger subdivision that you don't want to see them every 6 months. So 50 lots to sell, maybe you give them a year or 2 years. I've even seen this group do in the past. But it does talk about 6-month extension periods within the ordinance.
Okay. All right, let's
I'll
Make a
go ahead and make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for development sign extension for Henry Walker Homes at 352 North, 75 East, for a period of 6 months or until the remaining homes are sold, whichever comes first.
Second.
Aye.
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 Great, okay, next. Public hearing for the rezone of 9.98 acres at 370 South Angel Street from RA to R120 and preliminary plat approval for David's Place, first amended subdivision.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you did so, I appreciate putting them both together, as those items are the two, one and the same in what we're considering. So, but we would look for two separate motions after we finish our discussion on those items. The property right off the corner of Angel Street, you can see highlighted here, and Galbraith Lane. So the property owner, you can tell, just barely shy of the true acre. The RA zone would have accommodated a lot split with two true half-acre lots, but because they're 0.98 acres total and just shy of that, they're requesting the rezone, which allows for lots as small as 20,000 square feet each. Half acre is 21,780, so there's the potential of being about 1,500 square feet in difference in the lots. Otherwise, the frontage requirement can change from the R1 that's allowed at 90 feet, where the RA would have required 100. This would have met it. The applicant came in some time ago and requested what would need to be done to maybe subdivide this lot. And I spoke with her, and she's since been working, and they can speak to that with her HOA. When the subdivision to the west of it was platted, I don't know the full history, but for some reason, a survey error or whatever have you, there was about a 6-foot strip of property, I don't even know if it's that large, up against Galbraith Lane that was left as a remnant. So they've been working with the HOA to have that turned over to theirs so they control it. And so that's been taken care of. So everything that's shown here is theirs. It sounds like they've been working with the neighborhood, and I've heard from the HOA or residents of that themselves that they're aware of what's happening, and perhaps through the hearing we may hear from some of them. But I believe this evening, with two items that we're looking at, the rezone itself for the Planning Commission to make a recommendation as to whether or not you feel it conforms with the general plan and is appropriate for the site, and make that recommendation forward to the City Council. The second would be regarding the subdivision. And I'll just show the zoning map. So you see a lot of R120 in brown. The bright green is the RA, so there's a lot of that smattered all over West Kaysville. What we have here is the concept of preliminary plat, just showing essentially what they're hoping to do is take the large back half of the lot and create essentially a half-acre lot behind the existing home. So that home would remain, and the back half would be available for a new building, a new dwelling. Should the Planning Commission, after making recommendation on the rezone one way or another, it would be my recommendation that you recommend approval of the preliminary plat. So even in an event where you don't feel it's appropriate to recommend the zone, the plat could be approved subject to the council's approval of the zoning district. It does meet the acreage and frontage requirements. There's no right-of-way or street improvements, so no real discussion to go with those elements. With that, I'll close my remarks. I know the applicant's here if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to fill those as well after you hold the public hearing.
Thank you. So you said you want, even though this is one item, you want two separate motions.
Please. Yeah, it's listed on as item 4 and 5. So one staff report, but there are two items on the agenda, so we'd appreciate that.
And is this the sum total of the preliminary plat map? Is this?
That's the details that we have currently, yes.
So is there access to the back lot? Is it, how is that going?
Yeah, so the front lot has access both on Angel Street and Galbraith. It's that existing home. The access to the back lot would just come off of Galbraith Lane
Is a separate.
to this property. So the white portion is roughly where that second lot would be created.
So it's
Oh,
not
I
intended
see.
to be a flag lot with an
Correct.
entry off Angel.
Absolutely correct. It is two standard
gosh,
lots.
I get it now. That's the the house next
Okay.
to it's part of it. Yeah, right in. Yeah.
That makes sense.
That makes sense.
Well, I don't, is there a big loss in feel of the neighborhood when it shifts from agricultural to, I mean, residential, what's the RA to 120? It doesn't seem like. Yeah. Yeah. There's some frontage issues and stuff, but that's not really a problem here anyway, so. Anybody else have any concerns or issues?
No, I think it makes sense. It's in line with the neighborhood.
There's been no correspondence or anything about this rezone?
Yeah, so the only comments that I've personally received or heard was from a resident in the neighborhood that said, hey, just a heads up, we had a HOA meeting the other day and we approved the transition of that sliver parcel. So it's a little hard to see in these items, but up against Angel Street, there was a 3 to 6 foot, I forget the exact dimension, strip that was somehow left in the HOA's name. It's actually behind their fence on this lot already, so she's been taking care of and maintaining it, if I recall correctly, but sounded like they had good support of what was being asked for from the neighborhoods. So.
Great. Thank you. We'll open the public hearing now on this item. Is there anyone here that would like to address the commission on this item? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Any further discussion, or should we take a motion?
Just a quick question. You're talking about this little sliver of land. Did the sliver of land bring them to the .98, or did that put them over the .98 and we wouldn't need to rezone?
Yeah, great question. So if my recollection is they had .92 acres on the lot with the house, and it was .6 or .06 acres on that little sliver. And so the sum total of those two brings her just shy of an acre.
Okay.
And that's where we decided that the zoning designation would be required in order to split it.
Thank you.
Is there an address on this? Oh, there it is. Okay, I would make a motion then that we recommend to the City Council approval for a rezone of .98 acres at 370 South Angel Street from the RA Residential Agriculture Zone to the R120 Single Family Residential Zone.
Second?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay. And then we'll make need another motion that might be contingent upon that one.
And then I would make a recommendation, or, well, let's see, Lyle, do we approve it at this point?
Still a recommendation on the preliminary plat, and
Still
then when they come back
recommendation.
with the final plat, you get
Final,
to
sorry.
All right.
approve.
So
deny.
I would then make a motion for a recommendation to the City Council to approve the preliminary plat for David's Place First Amended Subdivision at 370 South Angel Street, subject to approval of the rezone by the City Council.
I'll second that as well.
Aye.
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 Okay. Moving on to public hearing for the rezone of 5.74 acres of property at 1955 West, 200 North from A5 to RA, let's see, and RA to the R18 zoning district to include the PRUD overlay zone.
Just as a brief introduction to it, and I know that the applicant developer has some items they hope to present as well, so I'll try not to duplicate too much, but
Prior to the public hearing?
you're welcome to let them know when to, perhaps it could be beneficial to demonstrate it before the public hearing.
Okay,
And we'll
we'll do
let you,
that.
as the chair, choose that. Thank you for asking. And the property just east of Angel Street on the south side of 200, again, encompasses, two lots. You can see them highlighted here on the screen. One of them is a home which currently fronts Angel Street, or 200 North Street. The other is currently used for agricultural land. The crux of this, about 5 acres of property. The request to rezone the property from the existing A5, which is the large piece, and R120 is for the purpose of accommodating essentially a patio home type development. And so the concept plan that's been presented here demonstrates essentially about 20 homes on the 5 acres of property. They're showing a cul-de-sac street, but that they're able to continue and actually push 1700 West through to line up with Wilkie Street. So going back to the aerial, that would take care of a dead-end scenario that we've got that is expecting some sort of future connection through, and it would line up with the street to the north. So that's at least the concept idea of why they're asking for the zoning designation. The R18, again, it's a single-family designation. Typically, you have an 8,000 square foot lot type development. These lots are smaller, and so what they've requested is the PRUD overlay zone to do it as a common open space subdivision. So again, under a density of about 5 unit an acre at the max, which would allow more units than what they're requesting. But in the PRUD, the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council can make some variations with the standard lot. So lot size, lot width. They have open space and common space areas within the subdivision that have to make up a certain open space percentage for it to function. Based on the concept, at this point, we've not calculated the specifics to verify if they've provided sufficient yet. However, it looks to be that they're in the realm of something that would work within those provisions. So should the zoning and this type of development be desired as we go through a platting process, we'd have to ensure and verify that all those details are in fact in place, if that's the direction of ultimately the City Council and this commission. So again, as just the rezone legislative decision, we're looking for a recommendation this evening from you for the City Council, how well it fits within the general plan. As we've talked about many times, it's very general, but much of the language that we refer to with housing speaks to density west of I-15, typically being 2 unit per acre, 0 to 2 units per acre, with additional density along major streets. 200 North certainly qualifies as a major street according to our major street plan. And what additional density means, it doesn't say, so that would be up to you to deliberate and make a recommendation based off that if you feel this is appropriate. Again, it's a public hearing, as stated by the chair. I've got some slides from the applicant that show a little bit more detail on what they're expecting. I just want to make sure we open it up for chance for comments from the public. I believe I recognize them here this evening. The one comment that I've received, which has been forwarded to the commission, had to do with fencing, particularly based on neighboring properties. So I'll let them speak more directly since I believe they're here. But once the hearing's over, if there are questions of myself, please let me know, and I'll return it to the chair.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. So the developer's here. You want to spend just a few minutes? We'll give you a chance in the public hearing and then comments after that. But if you have some that might help set the stage, that would be great.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you for letting me take some time. My name is Brad Frost. I'm the owner of Capital Reef Management, which is our development side of Ovation Homes. Ovation Homes will be building the homes. We do active adult communities, 55 and older. We're currently working on the one in Orchard Ridge. We also did another one in Kaysville over by Tasty's Donuts a few years ago. And we're excited to be back. It's hard to find pieces of ground in Kaysville that fit and an active adult scenario, and we feel really strongly that this one does. And we'll go through and show you a few things and about why we think that way. And some of it you've probably seen before, so I'll blow through it pretty quick so I don't take up too much time. But we've been doing this for active adult communities for over 20 years. We have 30 plus years experience in developing, and our communities are designed specifically for active adults. They're not targeted, they're restricted. They're one-level homes. The ground itself lends itself to that as well, as it's lower than the roads on both sides, and will lend itself better for one-level homes there as well. So if you'd go to the next one. Just to give you an idea, we had a parade of homes in West Bountiful, a smaller city, had 40 lots there. It was the first PUD they had. We'd sold out within 3 or 4 months after it was approved. We were in the parade of homes. Our home was nationally televised on actually coming up here in May on the National Parade of Homes. We were in the top 10 in the nation, and they've come back several different times and done national shows, and so it's been a good experience. And the only reason I say it is not to prop up what we do, but we want to put a nice product in. We want it to fit well with Kaysville, and we know that there's a lot of pride of ownership in Kaysville on homes and homes around us, and these will not be a detraction. They'll be an elevation, we feel. So
So are those homes, sorry for interrupting,
Yeah,
but
no
those,
problem.
is that representative of the home that you're proposing to build here?
yeah, some of
What's
they'll
the square
range.
footage of those homes?
They'll range from 300 square feet to 700 square. I'm just kidding. I'm just trying to loosen it up here.
It's up a little.
It's 1,900 square feet to about almost 3,500 square feet. We just, in our new parade home that we're launching this year, we have a 2,300 square foot home with an 1,100 square foot loft that only changes the elevation about 3 feet. And it's a really, really neat, no one else in Utah does it. It'll be the first type of home like this for active adults. And so it'll give people the ability to have everything on one level and still have a place where the kids can go and doesn't bug them.
What's your price point on those typically?
We'll be starting around the 440, 450 range, and we have one house that will be going in that'll be about 1.2 million. So a pretty good range. Orchard Ridge that we're doing right now, low to mid 400s. They'll be up as high as 900,000 as well.
Okay, thank you.
So if you'll go to the next one, I'm sure you're aware of this, baby boomers, huge numbers coming up, and that factors into our next slide, is that in Kaysville, there's a significant need for this. There's over 5,500. We factored 6,000 citizens that are over 55 plus, but documentation that we found said 5,500. So I think it's higher than that, but 5,500. There's about 220 units in Kaysville to facilitate that, which almost 105 of those are units that we put in. And there's a high demand. There's just not a lot of places for these folks to go if they want to downsize. And this, it's 22 units. It will make a difference. We feel like it'll sell out in 2 or 3 months. We've already been getting calls of folks in the neighboring areas to move there. And so it would help alleviate some pressures there and also allow citizens in Kaysville to stay in Kaysville that may have to go elsewhere to find something. So if you go to the next one. Standard features, all of our houses come with yards, fully done, fully fenced. The fences are on the back of the homes and on the surrounding subdivision, and so when you drive in, it feels more open. The fences are not put towards the front of the home. We want it to feel more open, but they still have their privacy, so it's the best of both worlds from a standpoint of design and functionability for the client. Roads are public. There's an HOA that'll take care of the maintenance of their front yards, snow removal, weeds, that kind of thing. The thing that we really are really adamant with is we try very hard to have public roads so that the HOA is just where these lots are owned, it's just facilitating maintenance. And so you just don't get the problems that you get with other HOAs where you've got private roads and clubhouses and so forth that after the developer leaves become a little bit harder to make sure they're funded properly. This just gives a few pictures of some of our insides, and you can go through that. Next one. Next one.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So I know we've seen another project of yours. Will this have sidewalks in this neighborhood?
Yes.
So all
Plenty.
the way around, okay.
Uh-huh.
And wider streets too?
Just normal public
normal,
streets.
okay.
Yeah. that's what the plan is.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And
Another quick question. Do you have any numbers that you could maybe address the impact of these active adult communities as opposed to a typical neighborhood? Because
Yeah.
That slide just showed that it was 3.71 is what they're anticipating with this demographic, where
Right.
the regular one is 11.
Can
so-
you just speak to that a little bit? Because that's
Absolutely.
always a concern is
Yeah.
all this traffic we're going to have from this high density, and if you can maybe alleviate some of those.
Sure. Great question. What we've found over the years of doing this, there's a 70% reduction in traffic compared to a medium-sized family, which a medium-sized family defined is 3 drivers. So, Kaysville tends to have more drivers than that per family, especially when you're getting into half-acre lots. You're talking 4, maybe 5 sometimes. And so it's a 70% reduction. It's a huge deal for a community because you're getting wonderful citizens that are involved. They don't impact schools. They don't increase traffic. And it's just a great product type and group of people that help support versus cause a lot of additional resources. And our demographics, really we're looking at, a lot of times people traditionally think these homes are for folks that are 80 to 95, and although we do get some of those, the majority of the people that will be buying in this project end up in Orchard Ridge are 55 to 70. So anyways, I hope that.
It does. Thank you.
As far as the density goes, we're at 3.8 units per acre. It's not super dense. 5.74 units per acre. We bought, have under contract, the Swallows home that borders 200 North. And we also, the other property of the Longacre Harvey property also connects to 200 North. And one of the things is we've worked, and I'll be done, and you can ask questions, but what we've tried to do, we've met with a few neighbors, and I've been very, very impressed with the neighbors and the people we've talked to. You don't always see perfectly eye to eye because you have different vested interests, but very respectful and good conversations, and been very impressed. I think one of the things that, just so you know, we are flexible to work and do what we can to help alleviate some of their concerns. I think one of the issues is with the road going through, and I know the city's position on it, and I agree with them on that. I see this, if you've lived at a dead-end cul-de-sac for 20 years, it's hard to have someone come and live next to you, and so I can appreciate that. And so what we're looking to do is get comfortable with the zoning and then work with staff and with the neighbors and come up with something that everyone can feel good about.
A couple more questions I have is, if you could actually blow that one up, if you could show us kind of where the fence line's going. You talked about the fence line a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
But where is it going around the whole perimeter, or?
Whole perimeter, except for on the open space along 200 North. We'll want to leave that open. That becomes a safety concern, but it'll go all the way around because the lots go around, and then every lot will have 20 feet from the back of the property to the back of the home, and we'll close it off, and that'll all be completely landscaped. So the end product just looks phenomenal, and it's all completed.
And the other question's more dealing with water. You got the little stream that runs through there. Actually, it's an absolutely beautiful piece of property. Every time I drive by it, I love that property in there. But how are you incorporating that in? And one of the assurances that we wanted from one of the residents was that they still had the ability to access for watering. So how are you proposing to do that? How is that going to fit in with it?
So as far as the watering goes, this is what I understand, and some of it we'll have to do as we go through preliminary and engineering and stuff. But from what we understand, that there was a storm sewer that that emptied out onto the property from 200 North from years ago, and with the new road coming in, some of that was corrected. So a lot of that water came from storm runoff from the north side of the street subdivision. And so that obviously will be capped and ran through the street system. We have an easement that will go to Angel Street through the Harvey's piece that will encompass storm and sanitary sewer. And then we'd connect the water with the stub road to the south. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and then because what is it? It's Snow Creek. Is that what it's called? Or Case Creek? Is it? Because there's a little creek that runs right through there, too. I was wondering how that was. Is that part of this property?
No, it wouldn't be a creek. It's not a creek. It's just natural. It's just from the storm.
Oh, so that's what it is. It's
yeah,
not
it's
an
not a
actual natural
It's not
flowing.
a natural creek.
Oh, okay.
No. It was formed because of runoff from the storm sewer.
I didn't realize that. Thank
There's
you.
a ditch on the far west side that has, we just have to see if it's been used or if it's not used. But we'll make sure that whatever water sources or access that people have, we'll make sure it continues.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you for your time.
You bet.
Okay, unless there's some other urgent discussion, we'll open the public hearing. I imagine that many of you are here for this item, so please keep your comments to about 3 minutes. We're going to have Lyle time it, and his alarm will go off, and that'll be notice to you that you need to wrap up. And then if you find the person before you has said most of your comments, then just feel free to stand up and concisely state your opinion and that you agree with prior comments, and then sit down. We're glad to hear from you and want to hear what your opinions are, but we don't need to hear the same things over and over again if the person's repeated it already. So with that, we'll open up the public hearing. Please come forward and state your name, and we'll appreciate your input.
I'm Dr. Jim Knight. I live at 221 Seymour. And this proposal gives some heartburn in a number of ways. Number one, it increases traffic on 2nd North, which is already extremely busy. Number two, you've got a drainage through there that the neighbors use for irrigation. At least 4 homes do on the Angel side, and that would need to be addressed. This property is lower, per the statement I heard earlier, than surrounding areas, and it creates a drainage issue. I, for one, had my basement flooded this year, and I get kind of hostile about such things because it costs a lot of money to fix it. And so I would request the Planning Commission consider a moratorium on this type of stuff until you get a master plan in place that addresses the drainage issues. And the secondarily one is where I've lived the last 3 years, the water pressure has consistently dropped. And so the infrastructure for this subdivision isn't there because we're not getting enough water pressure. At least in my home, one person can't be showering where another one tries to shower, or the washing machine's running, you can't shower. And so we're having definite issues with infrastructure that needs to be addressed by way of a master plan. I request that you consider putting a moratorium on this until the master plan is addressed. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
Hi, I'm Dave Johnson, and we have the property that's right west of this development. And we have some horses in there. We have like a riding arena. So our concern was about the fence, and they've addressed that they would do a fence. We would like, maybe when they get developing, talk to Ovation and see about if we can do some kind of an upgrade where we can participate with them, just to make sure, because if we have an east wind and the vinyl blows out, the horses will go out too. So, and then I have a concern about the ditch that comes down through there. We get irrigation water out of that and flood our pasture right there, and then across the road where Laws have that 5 acres over there, further west, down across Angel Street. That big piece right there, they have water shares, and they water, and 4 bushes use the water, and then Tina and Judy use water. So what we do is we turn the water up into that ditch last year on Friday night at 5 o'clock until Sunday at 5 o'clock. So there's a head gate where you can turn the head gate and turn water into that ditch and then use it, and then we would turn it, and then the water would go back down to a farmer that grows down below there. So our concern is that we would lose that water, or that irrigation ditch might be able to be moved up to the property line on the north side, out of the center of that. Anyway, we have a concern about losing the water that's there. We know the creek doesn't run anymore. It used to run all the time, but it doesn't run. So that's just my concern. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Come on up if you're ready.
Hi, my name is Sue Felix, and I am going to be a neighbor to this new Ovation project. My house is bordering the property that's going to be changed. I would just like to say thank you so much to our Planning Commission for making Kaysville an enjoyable place to live. And we've enjoyed 16 years here, and we've loved it, and we love where we live, and it's changing drastically. We're sad about that, and you can imagine it's hard to give up the space, but we can't expect that others wouldn't want to sell their property, and we get that. The concern that I have is I understand that, and it has been said tonight, that you want to make they're going to make an entrance through the Swallows House on 2nd North, and the proposal is, I understand, to continue on 1700 West, where I live. We have had very low traffic, so we're very, very concerned because the traffic in West Kaysville, as you know, is horrendous. And it is only getting worse with all the housing that is being built. We have, I understand that they need a place to get in and a place to get out. For 16 years, we have had one entrance and one exit, and it's 75th South. And now they're saying, but what I wanted to say in addition to that is we have more homes in our neighborhood than they're going to have in their neighborhood. So I'm wondering if we can just have a fence and not a continuation of the street from 2nd North through to 75th South. If you could stop that and just put a fence there, because what is going to happen is you're going to have people trying to get around that intersection. And it's going to increase the traffic, not just from a residential standpoint. It's going to be horrible. And everybody wants to take the shortest way. And I know that will happen. And so I hope that you would consider putting up a fence or allowing them to put a fence, not having the entrance from 2nd North continue onto 1700 West. I hope where our lives are going to be changing over this project, that you would take us into consideration for what we purchased and what we desired when we purchased our property, and we continue to desire as citizens of Kaysville. We've appreciated what we have, and we hope that our future is as happy as our past has been. I just want to say thank you for your efforts, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments.
Hi, I'm Dan Burton. I own the square piece that's immediately to the south of this property. There's approximately 6 acres there. I have my home. There's about 5 acres in pasture, and I've got a little arena area. And obviously, at some point in the future, that's good development property. I've been contacted up till now several times by other developers in the area, as well as the LDS Church, who's been interested in buying the property for a meeting house. Now, they've been expanding that all over Kaysville, as you know, so whether or not they've filled that need now, I can't tell you. But I would like there to be consideration given for future development concerns that I might have for my piece of property as well, so that it doesn't end up just becoming a landlocked piece of ground in the center there. I've had some real good discussions with the developer. I believe they're really interested and concerned about doing a good, well-done project, a quality project, and in working with not only Kaysville City, but the surrounding neighbors. So I feel pretty good about that, but I am just going to echo what others have said too about that continuation of the road from 200 North on through our subdivision. I don't think that's necessary. Our subdivision has worked great for all these years, and their subdivision would work equally as well with a single access and entry point off of 200 North. So with those things, you know, right now I don't have plans immediately to develop my property, so I can't even tell you what's in my future. But when my property was originally, when we built my property, built the home on the property 16, 17 years ago, I submitted a preliminary plan to Kaysville City that I think is still in your files, that showed 9 lots on there that were in keeping with the existing zoning, which was R20 zoning. And it was just a preliminary proposal to see what the response would be. The response, and I've got a letter that's in my files at home that just said, yeah, this is in keeping with what the zoning is and what looks like the future potential for your property would be. Their zoning would be higher than that. I think they're going to build a nice project, and I think there's a need for those type of properties around. So I'm not saying that I'm opposed to that. I am opposed to anything that would inhibit my ability to be able to make future plans on my property as well. So thank you very much.
Do you mind if I ask you just a quick question? The issue's come up from several people on the north side of Second North regarding flooding their homes. This, to my understanding, the whole lot is lower than Second North, so I don't necessarily see flooding going across the street. Do you experience flooding in your home on the south side of Second North? Have you to this point? Because I would be more concerned about you than I would someone on the north side of the street.
There's never been any flooding in my home. My home has stayed dry.
Okay.
I do get flooding down in the, what would that be, the northwest corner of my pasture.
Is there a pointer up there?
Right here.
Brought it with you?
I do get flooding right down here in this corner when they have flood irrigated this property.
Okay.
And, you know, when they flood it, there's a ditch that goes down here that I think has been abandoned a long time ago. It's still open in a lot of places. It's closed in other places. There is this, we've always called it a creek that runs through here, but I believe that Mr. Frost said that's really a drainage ditch for I talk pretty fast. But anyway, to my knowledge, there's water in that irrigation ditch or storm canal or whatever most of the year. So where that comes from, I don't know, but it's pretty wet all the time. But as far as my property being wet, no. The only time it's gotten wet is down in that corner when the Harveys had flooded, or whoever flood irrigates that pasture to the north.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Matt Longacre. I apologize if I don't have any, I'm one of the families that you saw on there, Longacre Harvey. And I just wanted to, I've heard some of these comments on irrigation, flood irrigation. That was not irrigation water. That was essentially water that had been, I could say, illegally, you know, getting pushed onto our property that we essentially made the best use of. So being a family of farmers, they would take that water and, you know, whether it's planting trees or whatever, there was never a dearth for, you know, water. So just people saying a little creek in there, a little irrigation, that was not a desired planned irrigation creek. That was just water that was essentially getting dumped onto our property that we were making use of. So, thank you.
Thanks, appreciate that.
I'm sorry, there's one other thing that I didn't mention that I think I should mention. But when I mentioned future development of my property, the developer has been very cooperative and very helpful in indicating that he would work with me to provide an easement and some type of probably stubs for both sewer and water. So that would obviously be helpful, and I'm assuming, we haven't gotten into any of the details of that, but I'm assuming that that would come somewhere down in that northwest corner as well.
I've got a question. I was going to hold it till after the public hearing, but I'll ask you now. You mentioned you didn't want to have your property landlocked in there. Looking at this, how would you gain access? Would you come off of 1700 in there right now, or I mean, when you develop it, how would you bring?
The access would have to, well, the proposal that's in the files, and I'll use my pointer again, if I may. But the proposal came in here, there was a road that came down here.
Okay.
And turned, and this piece here is 6 acres.
Does that road connect anywhere that you're talking about?
Nope.
It'd just be a circle.
It ended in a cul-de-sac.
Okay.
It ended in a cul-de-sac right here, which I think is the way it's in your file.
I'm wondering, just thought, the last one was, didn't want to take 1700 and continue it all the way over in Ty because it would create the traffic. If the proposed piece was shifted a little bit so that the traffic would eventually maybe connect down at the bottom, it creates a loop almost, which is going to create a real inconvenience for through traffic. That might solve through traffic issues that was just expressed, but then still get you access, then still accommodating the proposed development.
Well, conversations that I had years and years ago with Kaysville City officials led me to believe, and these were just discussions, but eventually we thought we would come out here, Harvey's would develop at some point in time, and come back down to Angel Street in this fashion. Well, it'd be probably right along where this is showing, and then down here like this.
Yeah, and now there would be the opportunity to go up and then out to 200.
We couldn't have done that either because there were lots down here. The road had to come over in here somewhere. I'm sorry if I'm blocking people's view. But like I say, I think the plan that was submitted showed a cul-de-sac. It didn't show a through street. We had discussions about how that would eventually happen when all of the rest of that Harvey property was developed. Because there's certainly, see, this is all Harvey property here, is my understanding. And you can, that's correct. Yeah.
Well, I mean, whenever you see that long road, the 1700 West, I mean, the city is planning on that going somewhere. It doesn't just stub a street and let it and have it stop. So there's got to be some plan, some idea that road is going to connect somewhere.
Why does it have to connect somewhere?
Well, I mean, that's not good.
Yeah. See
Well, that's maybe that may or may not be the case, but it's not good planning to have a road just stop and go nowhere.
They got it stubbed right now. I think with the plan to maybe come out, but right now the road would come in and then it would come over here. And that's a concern that was just expressed, was that through traffic they're going to come down over here.
Lyle address that after the public hearing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, but it connects here. But if you were to loop down here, then come around and then tie in here, then that becomes, for better word, collector.
Well, that doesn't work with this plan that's on the table.
No, it doesn't. They'd have to.
I'm not sure why those cul-de-sacs wouldn't work just as well as through roads.
Well, and we have to also remember that we're in a zoning
we're in the
question
zoning.
and public hearing, and this has gone kind of well beyond what we normally do in a public hearing. But I think it's helpful. But I think it's helpful. But I think part of the reason why I mentioned that is because when you have a road like that, there's a clear indication that it's going to go connect somewhere. I mean, that's the fundamentals of planning. So.
Cul-de-sac on the end of this road right now. This over here, and this creates
She had kind of an angelic glow in her.
It's glowing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next. Okay, we'll Okay.
My name is Flint Barber. In interest of full disclosure, I'm the agent helping to sell this. So I also have a unique perspective in that in Kaysville, there are really only two communities that would be similar, well, three, that would be similar to what Ovation's putting in here, and one is literally in my backyard. And it's a great asset to our neighborhood and to our community. As I sell homes in Kaysville, people reach 65 or 70 years old, and they can't maintain their half-acre lot, or they don't want to live in their old home in the old part of Kaysville, and there are very few options for them. And it's a shame that we lose a huge percentage of our senior people to Layton and Clearfield and other communities that have more of this type of housing. I think with regards to traffic, you typically have one, maybe two cars. I know the neighborhood that is in our neighborhood, and I don't know what the number of trips would be, but it's pretty close to zero. I mean, obviously there's going to be some traffic, but and it's just such a great asset to have, and so I hope that it gets approved because, frankly, I'd like to see my parents live there and other people. I know the community in our neighborhood has basically a waiting list, and the minute somebody dies, somebody moves in. So we would love to have a place for more of our senior people that have that great experience to be in our neighborhoods. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. We're at public hearing. Just come up to the front and state your name, please.
Hi, my name is Susan Knapp. My husband and I and our family live at 69 South 1700 West. Apologize, I'm late for the meeting today, but we just found out from our neighbors who received some information in the mail, which we did not. So I'm really disappointed about that. I think I'm against the development. I think it's, and I apologize that I've missed for a lot of information, so I apologize if I'm repeating what someone else has already presented, but I think that when we moved here, we moved to Kaysville because we were told that everything west of the highway would be a half-acre lot. We have a half-acre lot. And I've been very disappointed when I see other developments coming in that are less than a half an acre, yet the appeasing terminology is that they have had some common areas, which we see at some of the Hill Farm estates. So this property isn't large enough to accommodate that with 20 units. Nor am I going to be pleased with the traffic coming through. I know that people are going to come to Angel Street, especially because of the Angel Street Park. They're not going to want to go all the way to the light and be worried about that traffic, and they're going to cut straight through. And it'll happen the other way around as well. I'm positive of it. A quarter-acre lot is, and I'm not sure the size of the houses that are going to go on that, but I can certainly imagine that people are not going to have enough room to park in their lots. They're going to end up parking all over the street. And whether it's them or families or other people visiting or staying for lengthy times, and I can certainly expect that there'll be trouble clearing the streets in the winter. There'll be additional high traffic coming through that area. I am so displeased with the fact that this is even being presented. I appreciate that there's a public hearing to discuss it. I'm disappointed I didn't find out a little bit sooner that it was this evening. So I'm not as prepared as I certainly would be otherwise. But what I've shared are just a few of the comments that my husband and I have had a chance to personally discuss. Nor have we had an opportunity really to, normally our neighborhood would get together and have some conversations about this. And I saw so many people just tonight standing out in their areas, you know, working in the yard or whatever on this nice day, not coming here. So I'm not sure if those individuals on our on 75 South were as given any kind of notice personally in the mail like a different neighbor had been. So maybe they know, maybe they don't. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your time.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. All right, open it up to discussion amongst the commission. Comments, questions?
I have a question, and maybe it's for Lyle. It's about secondary water. Secondary water is available, right?
So, yeah, pressure irrigation system, I believe Davis Weber Canal Company would service this area.
Okay.
So, yes, I believe it's available. It runs up and down 200 North. Part of the subdivision process, we have to verify with that irrigation provider that they have the number of shares necessary. Otherwise, we don't permit or finish the subdivision process.
Okay, thanks.
Lyle, could you maybe speak to the requirements of a cul-de-sac versus a stub road? Because as I'm looking at this 75 South and 1700 West, these roads extend a tremendous distance beyond what would normally be allowed from a cul-de-sac standpoint because it's a stub road. And the intent is at some future point, we're going to develop this out. So we'll allow this longer, in effect, cul-de-sac because it's not a cul-de-sac. So can you maybe speak to that a little bit and why we allow a stub road? Because the intent is at a future date, it will be finished. And so finished through to somewhere else.
Yeah, and so that pretty well covers it, so I almost could say ditto, but currently Kaysville City has a limitation on a dead-end street at 600 feet. So a cul-de-sac, anything that exceeds that, and most of those would be roughly 6 houses deep in this part of town based on lot widths, would exceed our standards. So this current road, I don't have the dimension on me, we could do it, it's probably close to 1,500 feet in length before it stops. But we allow them regularly, much as was expressed, to permit and grant access for future development, but also to plan just for those future connections. So we'd push them through if we could, but not imposing development on properties that aren't yet ready to be developed. We simply stub or push them up against property lines to allow that potential in the future. But ultimately, when opportunity comes, we want to complete those connections, push them through. Reason being, our utility systems function better when we have looped systems with our water lines in particular. Also access, vehicular traffic, having multiple points of access disperses and spreads traffic throughout so that alleviates traffic on some areas and puts it on others, so there's trade-offs with that. But primarily, emergency services is one of the reasons as we've reviewed the concept and proposals as staff, having multiple options to get into areas in the event of an emergency. Our fire services and ambulance crews want more than one option to serve a community. So when we get these opportunities to connect, and in this case, where it would line up with Wilkie Street to the north and create a good intersection, offsetting it. You offset too much, it gets a little bit more dangerous with turn movements through intersections. So when we can align streets, that's preferred on our end. So from that particular component, as staff, we've asked and encouraged and would recommend that should the development occur, that we do get that through access for those reasons.
And I would just, do you want to comment first?
Yeah, just one other thing, and it's in relationship to the potential future development of the other 6 acres. If this road does not go through, would he be able to develop that 6 acres with a cul-de-sac off of a road that's already extended 900 feet past the limit, or would he be landlocked and wouldn't be able to develop?
We wouldn't recommend it from a staff perspective. Obviously, the city council or other bodies in the past have permitted certain development to a certain extent, so they could determine that yes, that's appropriate. But I know our fire chief, initially when they proposed this, they didn't have much of a, couldn't provide much of a warm feeling to us that would actually be able to push through to 200 North. We weren't sure we wanted to recommend any development on the property until we could get the through street. But as the developer was able to show that, and as we've looked at it as staff, felt more comfortable, and that's what we would expect and be looking for, would be to make that connection. So because it would be a through street, and there's more than one way to skin a cat, so theoretically it could come up and turn, and we might say, okay, it's going to eventually push through to the east, or it might come back towards Angel, and we could say, well, we'll hope and bank on that maybe it will eventually push through there, and those could be options. This assures us that it will happen and at a good location in line with that Wilkie Street connection. So once there is a through street connection, then these internal roads, such as the Burton property, he then would have access or the ability to put in a cul-de-sac up to 600 feet in length, because it would be based off of a through street rather than a dead end. Okay. Otherwise, he just exacerbates the problem of single access entry points and outgoing the 600 feet.
Okay, thank you.
And I was just going to say, ever since I've been on this commission, and it's been years, I've always been troubled by the amount of stub roads that we have that just sit there. And when they get approved, it's like, oh, well, in the future it'll happen. But you know, these last a long time, and I would recommend and suggest that we as a planning commission, as a city generally, try to make these connections a little more certain and assured, because I think it is poor planning to have such a long road. I mean, just like what you were saying, we have this rule about cul-de-sacs being only a certain length, and I don't know how long this road's been in there, but it's almost 3 times as long as it should be. And so, and I think people that live on it start to get an expectation that they're going to have this quiet cul-de-sac road, when the expectation and the plan is that it's a through street. So I think it helps everybody around, both the people living there, and then, as you say, the community in general is benefited by the connections and knowing where the connections are going to be.
One of the lessons I think that we've learned in the years that I've been involved in this is that our founders really were pretty smart when they laid out the communities with grid patterns, because the connectivity of the streets, if you look at some of the older communities, particularly in the Salt Lake Valley, if you take a look at that, the older parts, Salt Lake City, Murray, South Salt Lake, some of those communities, they generally don't have that much traffic congestion as maybe some other places do. When you get further out, where some of the newer areas are, newer development, and where you start seeing a lot of cul-de-sacs and a lot of not through streets, there's a lot of congestion on the main roads, because in order to make even short trips, people have to go out to a main road and travel even just a short distance. But if everybody's doing a short distance on the main road, it pretty soon clogs up the main road. And so by having the grid pattern and a lot of what we call street connectivity, it disperses the traffic and it disperses the demand, and so that you really wind up having multiple ways to get to where you need to go. So I'm not a big fan of cul-de-sacs anymore. I think street connectivity really works a lot better for communities.
I agree.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so we closed the public hearing, and we're having some discussion about this recommendation to the city council about this rezone. We talked about traffic and connectivity. The water issues, those are hard for us to deal with, because that's not really our purview. That's where the engineers and the subdivision plan and plat.
I do a question with the developer. In speaking with Mr. Johnson on some of the concerns he brought up with the irrigation, you've had conversations with him, and have you talked with engineers or had any proposal or options on how to continue to provide that for him? We talked a little bit about it before, but he came and brought up some of the issues, and it actually goes across Angel and supplies some of the other residents there.
Sure, I think our job as a developer is to make sure that we don't stop water. I think the one thing that we just have to figure out is, again, that water that comes on that property was storm water that came from the subdivision to the north, like Seymour Street and some of those others, because of infrastructure issues, and so that got fixed, and so the water's come down. So if there's water that people are used to using and it's ditch and it's water shares, absolutely we're going to work with the city, with the farmers, and make sure that we don't stop the water that's coming, and that can be done multiple ways, but we do it in every development. Our intention would be to not make it so they can't grow more watermelon on the west side of Kaysville. So.
Go ahead.
No,
I was just wondering, so as far as public outreach goes, it sounds like you've spoken to the neighbors. Have you spoken to everybody? Did you have an open house, or what did you do? Just
No, I mean, we can have an open house. I think we've spoken to neighbors that it critically affects. We're very open to outreaching for this project and any of our projects. What we have found for Kaysville, this is a small group that's come out, and I think that's very, very good. Everything that we've heard and talked with people near the community and outside the community has been mostly positive. The only negatives have come by it's just a change, and but the density's never been an issue because people recognize that it's a product that's needed and it doesn't affect a lot of infrastructure and a lot of schools and things that Kaysville's really crowded with right now. So it's been very positive.
okay, thank you.
The last person that came up made some comments that I was hoping maybe you could address. I live very close to the Ovation Home project just off Main Street.
Okay.
And she had some concerns about there's going to be cars everywhere. We're not going to be able to plow the snow in the wintertime. Can you maybe talk about what your restrictions are? Because I walk through that development 2 or 3 times a month. There are no cars parked on the street. There's barely cars in the driveways. They've never had a problem pushing the snow. I've never seen an issue with vehicles in that entire community. Now, that's a brief glimpse of it.
Sure.
But if you could maybe address any restrictions that you have that might help alleviate questions she has.
In our restrictive covenants, we only allow them to have mopeds, so they can't have cars.
I like that.
That's why you don't see a car.
Golf carts,
I'm just
maybe?
kidding. No, I mean, they're all most of the houses you'll see in there will be 3-car garages, and there's 2 drivers. So, and the driveways are plenty big. They're public streets, so if you compare it to any other subdivision in Kaysville, you're not going to see even half of the cars parked because there are just not as many people living in those homes. And even when they have family gatherings, those are spread out, and most of the time they're parked on the driveway. But with that, but yeah, you never see. And in the restrictive covenants, we do have, you can only have 1 car parked outside your garage. You can't have RVs. They have to be put away. They can be there for like 24 hours, but it's not something that can be parked there. So we actually have more meat that we can go to make sure that the subdivision functions as it was proposed, above and beyond a public subdivision.
Thank you.
We bought down on Angel Street in 1973 on the west side, and we always got our irrigation from that stream right there. It's not turned in. They turn it in. There was always runoff water, but then they turn in water turns. There's a head gate right at the end of that on our property in Harvey's, built by Vernon Flint about 50 years ago, where he used to take water over and water where Angel Park is and where those subdivision is there. So that some of those properties across Angel Street, that's the only access to irrigation water unless they were to get pressure somehow to water their field until they develop.
So is there an irrigation company that controls this, or is it, do you own those shares? How does this work?
There was. Years ago, Wendell Law used to make shares, and everybody would have their shares. Vernon Flint, everybody that had land down there when it was open land. Wendell Law owned 15 acres where Perry Homes is built, and they still have the 5 acres there, and they water from, they have a couple of shares, and they water from that waterway right there. And I know maybe kind of dumped on Harvey ground, but it's been on Harvey ground for like 50 years, as long as I've lived down there, and maybe even longer.
So do you own shares in that?
We don't own a share. Across the road, Laws own a couple of shares, where the 5-acre field is, right there. And I don't know if Four Bushes do. So we've just kind of been lucky to be able to use some water out of there. We don't have shares to actually use it, but Laws, that's my in-laws that live across the road. So she was saying, and eventually that ground will develop within probably the next 5 years, because she's 87 now, and it'll develop when she's gone.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't know what she'll do till then. Anyway.
Thank you.
Lyle, does, just not on the secondary, but just on water in general, any comments from the city at all about, in general, about concerns about water in this area?
We've not reviewed it in that much detail. We are aware there's a head gate up here, has been mentioned, that water gets turned to fill the ditch, and they can control when the water's running in and out of it. So as far as the city's knowledge and look at it, Public Works, as they've reviewed it, they haven't had initial concern, just based on a conceptual that we wouldn't be able to manage anything. But once we start working with who's got rights, the water's got to go from A to B, handling storm drain. The culinary system is one we're hearing right lately. I hear it time and again from our Public Works and water crews that the pressures are there as they've always been. It's about, I think, about 80 psi in our mains. Goes at about 2,000 gallons per minute to service our hydrants. They're constantly flushing and checking hydrants throughout the city for the fire service and preparation on that. So we believe it's in good shape. We can check that in this area prior to approvals on it. But yeah, from just a conceptual, are there concerns? Not been made aware of any from them.
I mean, I agree with Matt, basically. If there are defined shares or prescriptive rights, it's the developer's obligation to provide or accommodate those rights, and that'll get worked out in the plat or the engineering. And if the developer doesn't do that, then they're subject to liability for not doing that, and that's kind of not really in our purview or whatever. So, and it sounds like the developer realizes that. I'm assuming they do, right?
Well, I think just a comment in general about a little bit of a higher density development in this area. The plan, the city's plan, does give some flexibility in that regard, and we've talked about that in the past with some of the other projects that we have. And when you look at this area and other things that have already been developed, and if you're going to get a higher density project, it's still single-family homes, just on smaller lots. And if, you know, in terms of the impact on the neighborhood, a senior living place is probably going to have the least impact of about anything you could
imagine
there.
Yeah.
So
well, and I was just thinking, doing the math, if this is 5 acres, that means 10 half-acre lots. Multiply that by 11, that's 110 trips a day.
Yeah.
Or you could have 20 at 4, and that's 80 trips a day.
So you wind up with less than you would have under the standard development. And I think it's a benefit to have diversity in a community anyway. I think it just benefits the community overall to have different styles of development and different demography for the community. So I like the proposal.
I was extremely leery when I saw it because of the density, the lot size, and I was picturing these little flats. I know you came in late. I wish you could have had the advantage to have seen the proposed homes that they were building. Actually, very attractive, very nice, and it's definitely not
upper end.
Yeah, it's definitely not lower to middle. It's $450 to over $1 million.
I think there'd just be one of those, but still, yeah.
You've already put an offer on?
No, I'm just looking. Yeah, I'm just looking at the plat.
That's all.
I'm just looking at the plat, and it's the one that's closest to, down there. That's the only one that's going to be
Lot 4?
right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So, I mean, looking at it, it's alleviated some of, at least the look and feel and some of the concerns I had initially, because I was extremely leery of it. But I think it is tasteful, and I do think that our city needs diversity, and the diversity this adds is really a natural transition from existing residents to move into it, that are, members of the community. And so I like it. I didn't think I would, but I do.
Yeah, same here.
I do have some concerns that were brought up regarding people cutting through. Honestly, it wasn't something that I had even considered until it was brought up here, but you're absolutely right. Nobody's going to drive down to Angel Street and wait for the light and turn. Everybody's going to go through this neighborhood. In fact, it's going to be worse on 75 South when that eventually goes through to somewhere, because that's a stub road as well. And I think it would be in everyone's best interest to address some ways to help reduce or eliminate the drive-through, the cut-through, because that's going to be a problem. I mean, I don't think anybody wants anyone driving through a senior community. Granted, it's right at the beginning or end of your trip, but going through a senior community at 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. Not that every kid at Davis goes 20 over the speed limit.
Some at Farmington.
Yeah. Some go more, yeah.
Right.
But that's a real concern for me, that people are simply going to tear down 1700 West, turn on 75 South, still going 40 miles an hour, and when 75 eventually goes into somewhere, it's going to be even worse.
That's why I personally like the idea of a horseshoe shape coming up. It allows access into the other development down the road. Plus, it also, you do a horseshoe in there, it really detracts. It's going to take more time, but I know we're only doing zoning.
The stub road.
It does circumvent the stub road and the intent of it.
Well, there's other measures to take too, right? I mean, you can put a big, nice, fat speed bump in there, and that changes everything.
Plow problems.
I mean, we have the flip side of this connectivity part, which is important to me, and then not having cut through traffic. But
well, the way to solve it is to have more connectivity, more through roads, but we may not have that option in this area because of where we're at so far in the development.
All right.
But just to put a fine point on what was said before, I suppose, maybe this is beating a dead horse, but my understanding is even if we wanted to, right at this moment today, we could not essentially close this off and put a fence there and essentially, for all intents and purposes, make that a cul-de-sac, and same there, because it would be violating our code. Right. And in order to do that, if we wanted to do it, and it sounds like we don't necessarily want to, but if we did, or if more accurately, if the city council wanted to do that, they would have to make a legislative decision on the existing code about the length of cul-de-sacs, and they would have to change it. And I suspect that would be an uphill battle. So we have to, recognizing that, we have to say, what else can we do? In my opinion, it makes logical sense to connect right there, and eventually there's probably going to be, if I were to guess, a connection here, and then maybe some connection over here.
Or there should be.
Yeah, and that's probably just what's going to happen. Maybe in a year, maybe in 20 years, but I do recognize that this street, especially if there's a connection up in here, is going to be a shortcut. And I actually have some sympathy because I live over on 300 West, and nobody wants to go to this light. They cut off over here, and they go up 300 West on my street up from Gailey Park. I totally understand where they're coming from, but sometimes that's just the reality of creating connectivity. People just do that. I mean,
And let me just jump in before, I want to make sure it's clear. We here are recommending or not recommending what the city council does. And so Josh's point about the city council having to make this ordinance change is more relevant to this decision right here, which is that we make a recommendation to the city council, and regardless of what we recommend, the city council makes its own decision. And the city council, as you know, is an elected body, which is therefore designed to be more open to and more subject to public opinion and politics that are involved there. And so we are more at a point where we're recommending what we believe is the best as far as planning goes, and the city council deals with the legislative and public and political matters. So that's just a reminder. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering, if the road went through 1700 West, who determines whether or not you can put up like cement barriers or something to kind of close it off for a time, so that it's still a road, but it's temporarily not accessible until some of the other streets are built out? Or, I mean, is that a possibility?
So the city council could desire that they block off the street, and as a staff, our public works department would follow their directive to do that if that was the decision or desire. We've done some similar things like that in the past. So just as an example, and not every scenario is slightly different, but when Barnes Drive, I think it's been 3 or 4 years ago, when we started doing the construction work on the signalizing the Flint Street and 200 North intersection, Barnes Drive almost became closed off at Flint Street based on concerns from neighbors of cut-through traffic. So during the construction, they were seeing quite a few people. If you're familiar with it, it's the street that runs diagonal from Flint Street to 200 North. So people would come, and instead of wanting to go to the intersection, cut through Barnes Drive, to just avoid it altogether. But it seemed that once the signal was in place, especially depending on the turn movement you're making, and if you wanted to ensure you had gaps, we haven't had a concern since. But so very similar. So there have been temporary closures to see what that looks like, and that was one on Barnes Drive where they temporarily, if I recall correctly, put up a roadblock to see the impact on traffic, and then took counts after without it, and didn't see much of a change. But every streets could be a little different, but the council could determine something like that is appropriate should they desire.
Okay. I'll just add that otherwise, I mean, I can understand the traffic issues. I live off of Sunset in a cul-de-sac, and we saw junior high go up, and there's tons of traffic, and it is kind of a pain because it's a major road, and it gets a lot of traffic. So I can understand it being frustrating, but I also believe that when you have a road that's part of the plan, someone suggested we follow the plan. That is the plan, but maybe there's ways to sort of minimize the impact initially or something. I don't know. But I do like the project, and I think that we need more diverse housing options. And I really haven't heard anyone complain about the density, saying there's too many. I mean, it's going to be a nice subdivision. It's going to have sidewalks. It's going to be single-family dwellings, like they've mentioned. So I would be inclined to recommend it, and maybe recommend it with some sort of a road temporary blockage situation. Can we recommend that?
I imagine we could, like a crash gate even,
Yeah.
that emergency vehicles could get through. They're not getting through cinder block wall, but
Yeah.
Or concrete wall, but a crash gate.
Didn't we do that over here with the retirement
We
community?
talked about it, but it
Didn't happen.
Okay, I couldn't remember.
it wasn't allowed.
Lyle, do you know what the density of that is? Units per acre?
So I believe the lots are essentially 6,000 square foot lots. So you're 5-6 units per acre.
So a little more dense than this.
I believe so, because they don't have within that specific neighborhood and the common areas in there. They'd have kind of the limited common just based on their private yards and front yards. But all the common area for this particular neighborhood is provided to the within the neighborhoods to the south.
Okay, I was
on the
going to say
west.
that's RA, and that's way more dense than the RA. But when you couple it with all of this, that's how you can get the
That's
density.
correct. That's how they receive their density.
Yeah.
So 5 to 6 units an acre is what I'm guessing.
Yep.
Got another question on the green space, A, B, and C here. Is it just grass, or what are you doing with it?
Typically, we try and make it fairly simple for the HOA. You know, off of 200 North, we'll probably have an entrance feature and some nice landscaping, but generally just trees and grass.
Okay.
So up on 200 North, those two lots that'll be open space, that won't be detention. All the stormwater will be down on the other opposite end, right?
That's on the west side as a detention area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The existing home is going to be raised then?
The erased? Is that what you said?
Raised, sorry.
Oh, no, it'll be
Torn down.
erased.
Demolished.
Demolished.
Synonyms. Let's see.
Sorry.
And one of the things that's helpful too is, yes, this property sits down lower and they're all one-level homes. They don't have basements. So that's another advantage for this project is, you know, that if the water table is higher, which we suspect it is, it's not going to be an issue for us because we don't have the basements to deal with.
Thank you.
Lyle, can you go to the broader zoning map? So my take on the density is, and in light of the general plan, I think this is close enough to 200 North to say that it's off a major street, in my opinion, so that if we are going to, as the general plan says, if we are going to have higher density than 2 units per acre, we do it along major streets. I think. Yeah.
So how do you justify that? And when it was there, it wasn't that major street.
Mm-hmm.
So you're gonna justify that you can have more dense area when you're connecting to a street that isn't. And then all those properties who people pay a lot of money for are not gonna be provided with a dense area.
But I would argue that the impact's going to be less because it's a senior living community. I think your overall impact's going to be less than if it were a standard development. It's even less than if it were a standard development.
So you're saying if this stayed the zoning that it was, or let's say it went R120 or something, that would add more traffic?
Yeah, if you look at what Matt's calculation that he just did, there would be less traffic under this development than there would be with a standard development.
I mean, I was
standard zoning.
relying on those numbers, but it was, you know, I did the number at 4, I think, and it was higher than what they had said. But and you also have to remember these are upper end houses too. So even though we think about, we kind of vilify density because we think it's going to bring in a lesser group of people that are going to be poor and they're not going to take care of the homes, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a planned community that's going to be funded by an HOA, and the entry purchase price is $450,000, and the HOA is going to be taking care of maintenance. So I don't think we're going to have the standard kind of stereotypical concerns about high density housing. In fact, I think it's going to be a nice addition.
And I think you're right, Josh. It's on a major street while it is also on another. It's like being on the corner of 2nd North and a non-major road. It's still on 2nd North. 2nd North is, based on the information we've received from just about everybody, one of the busiest streets in the city. It is one of the most major streets in the city. And per the general plan, that's where higher density is supposed to go. This meets that definition. No, it does abut another street that is going to suffer, per se, from higher density. But again, higher density, less impact. We could put less dense, but it would be higher impact. So I think you're kind of trading off here. You're looking at all the negatives, high density, but none of the benefits, less impact. So I would argue it's a wash.
One thing we ought to consider too is making this zoning recommendation, if we do in fact recommend it, be contingent upon some sort of development agreement that limited it to this kind of development as opposed to another kind of R1A. Because we're making this plan assuming it's going to be exactly this wonderful setup, but maybe if it gets rezoned, they can come in and put in the stuff that we are scared about, or that would really bear fruition on the concerns that are being raised here. So I would recommend that if we're going to do that, we ought to condition it upon a development agreement that limits it to this kind of development with this kind of a setup. So.
Yeah, and I agree largely with what's been said, but let me just finish my thought on the density part. I think I try, and I think we all do actually, to be consistent, and I think it would be a different proposal, for example, if this R18 was being proposed well off a major street, say over in this area something. I don't even know what's there. I'm just saying if you propose this over in a subdivision that's well off of any major street, it's different. And I think with zoning, you try to generally cluster densities and uses by each other. And I think an example of that is we have the business park, we have Smith's, and that's why I was in favor of this townhomes that was coming in here, because I felt like it was still in this vicinity of a similar uses and intensity of uses. It wasn't back up in here. We get that same idea over here. There's a little more dense. It's a little more dense here. This is dense. We have this general commercial. So it's generally clustering things here, and it's not putting it down here or somewhere else that that's well set off a main road and it has a different feel. And so I know, again, as I say this a lot, I know reasonable minds can differ on this. That's just how I see it.
All right, are we ready for a motion? Have we discussed this? Enough? More topics? Josh?
Tamara had like almost a perfect one there a few minutes ago.
I did what?
You had an almost perfect motion the way you expressed it, and then we got distracted. and started
Did she
talking
make a motion?
about- No, but
Oh.
her comment
All
on
right,
it
is someone
was-
ready to make a motion that's as good as
Oh.
Tamara's?
Oh, with my
Or even
housing,
better.
or with my road, street, temporary
Yeah.
structure there? Okay.
Yeah,
No.
I'm inclined to let that be part of the subdivision discussion.
Oh, okay,
Preliminary plat, I should
Okay.
say, sorry.
okay.
But I'm not, that's just me.
I'm not sure what's supposed to go into the development agreement, otherwise I'd make a motion. Does that have to be specific? Or can we
No,
just
I
say
think-
subject to?
I think it may be just, you subject the rezone or the recommendation that it's subject to being a development like this senior living facility.
Okay.
Or senior living proposal.
Okay. Sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Let me find it. Okay, I'll make a recommendation that we recommend to council that they approve the rezone of 5.74 acres of property at 1955 West, 200 North from the A5 heavy agricultural and RA residential agricultural to the R18 single-family residential zoning district to include the PRUD overlay zone, subject to a development agreement for similar housing, for similar project. Senior living, does that, okay.
I'll second that. Am I up?
I think it's Josh.
Oh, it's Josh.
Is it you?
No, I think it is me.
Oh.
Hi.
I'm not enthused about the development agreement part of it, but
Because of?
because
not
I
enough-
because
you
I
want it
mean
to be more restricted or less?
no I just it's a low risk. Ovation has they have it's under contract, and I'm sure it's contingent upon these approvals. As soon as they get it, they're going to go forward with it.
But
so
if Ovation sells it, somebody else.
and I'm saying that's a low. In my opinion, that's a low risk.
Is there a reason not to protect against it?
Well, we
I
don't
mean, you're
protect
an,
against
you're,
every
you're
risk
an
in
attorney.
life.
You're kind of into that business.
Yeah, some risk we let slide, and I'm saying this one I'm willing to let slide. But
so is that an yay or an A?
That's an aye.
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 Okay. Thank you all for your participation. Remember, there'll be notice about when this item will come before the city council.
Yeah, typically there's a 3-week delay, so I think this would be the first meeting likely in the month of June before it will be before the city council for their consideration. So it's the
Lyle,
first Thursday of the month.
There was a comment made about notice not being received. Can you maybe outline for us just real quickly who gets notified, how they're notified, so when they can expect notification?
Yeah, so we noticed the public hearing. So this meeting was noticed with a mailer. By our ordinance, we send notice to properties within 500 feet of the property under consideration for rezone. We also post notice on the property. So I believe in this case, we have one along 200 North, but also one at the end of the stub street, 75 West. On this one, there are a lot of large property owners. I was just looking as the comment was made. I don't know names of what was received, but there are roughly 20, I think 28 notices that went out based on that distance, mailed notice.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ready for the next one. Conditional use permit for a 2-family dwelling Shane and Carrie Hughes at 757 East Brookshire Drive.
Okay, I'll again introduce this, and I believe they're here this evening. I know Shane himself was possibly coming in late, but it looks like he's got his Carrie here's available to represent themselves. The following 2 items are on the same property, but they're pretty different in their request. However, if you find a nexus or link between them, we can kind of merge the conversations. But the initial request here to look at a 2-family dwelling on the property. Currently, the lot, it was originally platted and subdivided as a lot back when this was done many years ago. Over time, the property owners to the west and the property owner to the east took half of the lot and essentially dissolved it, so it hasn't been in place for a long time. Right now, the Hughes family lives on the west, in the home west of the property. They're working on acquiring the remainder of the vacant lot and kind of reestablishing it in order to build a new home on the property. And so it's that vacant space where they're requesting to do this duplex or 2-family dwelling by our ordinance. Within the R1 zoning districts, and this is true for R18, R110, R14, 20, all of them, Kaysville City ordinance does allow by conditional use for 2-family dwellings, so long as there are no more than 3 duplexes or 2-family dwellings within 500 feet. As the staff report states, that 500 feet is measured from the center of that site. So we've reviewed that as staff. You can see that yellow circle that this encompasses. Within that, I was not able to identify any formal 2-family dwellings, so they don't seem to be restricted, at least by that radius requirement, on their ability to do it. Otherwise, with that, the Planning Commission's consideration would be to look at it on its merits, decide if there are impacts that would come from that, and if you do desire to, again, impose conditions upon that to mitigate some of the impacts that may come of it from the neighborhood. So the applicants provided a site plan to show what that may look like. Again, their existing home is here on the left side of the screen. The home being proposed, you can see there in the middle with all the dark lines. Sorry, the dimensions are a little difficult. You might get it better on your tablets. Single family dwelling from the looks of the street, and so we've provided an example there. This is an architectural rendering of the home, what it may look like. My understanding, and Ms. Hughes can speak to this in more detail, is the extra unit would be a smaller unit above the garage, built and hopefully able to use as that second unit. So you don't have 2 large units. You can see within the floor plan roughly the size of that. I'd assume you're 40 by 20 by 20. You're probably in a 500 square foot range for that additional unit is I believe what they're anticipating. So with that, we'll have that discussion first. My recommendation would be for the Planning Commission to take a look at the two-family dwelling. Staff's recommending approval based on there not being others within that required distance, but that approval be based on the completion of the subdivision plat recreating that lot. And that also, and my recommendation was that parking would be provided. Typically, our ordinance requires 2 parking stalls per unit. So that's where this comes from, but be provided at a minimum of 2 parking stalls, and no more than 2 of those required parking stalls may be in tandem. So that way people aren't juggling cars necessarily as much to get in and out. So what this provides, I think, could accommodate that. They do show at least a 2-car garage, and then they would have space to the west of it, essentially to provide a RV pad or 3rd-car parking space. Plus, they have all the driveway space in front of that. So they'll probably have 5 or 6 technical stalls based on our ordinance, and at least based on the way this is written and my thinking, whether the language makes sense to anybody else, no more than 2 of those are in tandem.
When you say tandem, you mean double parked, like one behind
bumper
the
to
other?
bumper kind of thing, rather than side to side.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt again, but on that prior thing that we just talked about, there were no notices mailed out. We're both adjoining property owners to that, and we never received any notice. If we hadn't seen the yellow sign posted on the property, we'd have never even known about the meeting. And there were other people here tonight that said the same thing. The one lady that showed up was called by a neighbor 10 minutes into the meeting, and she raced up here. So I think the notification process needs to be a little sharper.
I appreciate that, but I thought the woman that came late said that the person she talked to did get a mailing.
Well, she got a mailing. We're adjoining property owners.
Right, no, I mean, apparently it
She
didn't.
got a text from this lady is what she got.
Okay.
She didn't get a mailing. She got a text from Sue Felix.
Okay.
I texted her.
Okay. Great, well, we will look into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that means we could do that again. Great. Okay. Where do we
Yes.
settle?
Apologize. So I believe that completes our remarks, so that's our recommendation to recommend approval of that use with the subdivision plat being completed and the parking, at least a minimum of 4 parking stalls, 2 per unit.
So you're saying 4 that are not what you call tandem?
2 of them could be in tandem, is
Okay.
my
At
recommendation.
most, is what he's saying.
So are you saying the second unit is above the garage?
That's how it's being proposed, correct.
How big is it? What's the square footage?
So, let's see if I can see the details on it, but it's a 2-car in width, so you're roughly 20 feet by maybe 25.
For that second unit?
Correct. So that's about 500 square feet.
Okay. So it's kind of like an ADU. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, what'd you say?
An accessory dwelling
Oh,
unit.
AU, okay.
Yeah,
So it's a standalone, separate dwelling. It's not connected at all?
Yeah, so the way this would be, let me show the front facade of the home again, and then perhaps the owner could speak to it even further if needed. And so these are just the plans, right? But it's all part of the same building, so it's
Okay.
essentially duplex, so they share walls.
Okay, so
However,
it's-
it would have its own separate meters, utilities,
I think the
HVAC,
entrance would be
Okay,
there,
and
okay.
access.
up the stairs
I
to
see.
this.
And what that allows, typically in a single-family home, so the Kaysville City ordinance says a single-family home would allow for occupancy by a single family, which is defined as anyone related by blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship, and so forth. So that may be 2 people, that may be a dozen, depending on how big your family is. So in this case, we would allow in those spaces for 2 families. The other remaining part of that definition is or not more than 5 people who are not all related, so you could have a roommate situation.
Okay.
So if, for example, they had a family of 5 in the main home, under a typical single family, nobody could go up and live. They wouldn't be able to rent out or utilize this above garage living space unless it's their family. But this would allow them to rent that out, and it's a small enough space. I don't know exactly what you fit in there, but another couple of bodies probably
Okay.
could technically occupy it, despite any relationship.
But it's separately metered and it's,
Correct.
okay, thanks.
And it's built differently per building code with some fire separation and things as well.
Okay.
are we discussing?
Yes. Unless, do
Or the applicant?
you want to have the app, do you want to? So let me just ask, so the idea is that there's going to be a driveway right there into that, what looks like the garage, and then they'll enter from the side up to the?
Correct, yep,
Okay.
through the garage.
So you won't see a front door, a second front door?
Yep, and no stairs either. The stairs are inside the garage.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think that's a nice configuration.
thank you.
Just out of curiosity, because honestly, I don't think this should not matter to us. But will there be like bathroom? The plans we see, there's no plans on that bonus room. Is that to be future built out or something?
We have it designed, and yeah, there's a bathroom and
Okay.
a small kitchen.
Yeah.
And a bedroom. Yeah.
I think it's good planning to have a bathroom in a separate.
Right. You know, I mean, I just saw a blank bonus room, so whatever.
Okay.
Personally, I don't have a problem with the two dwelling simply by the fact of there's nothing else in 500 feet, and the ordinance, as I understand it, says we can have one within that 500-foot radius, and here you go.
Well, and the plan looks like a great plan.
It
Like,
does,
Yeah.
it doesn't look like people are going to see that as a duplex, and it's
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, you know, with the house, we really do have a housing affordability problem in our region right now. And one of the techniques, and this is included in the big bill that was passed by the legislature this last session, to help address that is to allow what are called accessory dwelling units, or ADUs.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're calling this a duplex, I mean, it's an accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
It makes sense,
What it is,
too.
and I think that's a great way.
Yeah.
It's an affordable option for people to find a place to live.
And I think when we hear duplex, we think you can tell from the street that it's a
Right.
duplex. You can't tell that this will be a duplex.
Yeah, it's
Right.
really
Right.
well designed from that
Yeah.
standpoint.
So I don't think there's a lot of problems we need to mitigate
Right.
here. So let's
The only one is parking, and that sounds like there's plenty.
Well, and Lyle's suggestion is we make that part of our motion that's about to come forth, I'm sure.
The tip of our tongue.
You ready?
I'm ready for a motion.
All right, well, I'll make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for a two-family dwelling for Shane and Carrie Hughes at 757 East Brookshire Drive, with the conditions that a subdivision plat be completed and approved for the creation or recreation of the proposed lot where the two-family dwelling would be located. Parking be provided, a minimum of 2 parking stalls per unit in accordance with Kaysville City Code 17-32-5, and the number of parking spaces required, that no more than 2, and no more than 2 of the required parking stalls may be in tandem.
Second.
And Commissioner, if I may, there are some interested public in speaking on this. I know there's no public hearing, so I'll leave it up to the Planning Commission if you wish to entertain additional comments at this point.
Okay. Why don't you take a seat? We'll entertain just a brief comment, if you will. There is no public hearing here, so if you want to come forward, do so now and be as brief as possible.
I'm a neighbor, just concerned because, you know, I live in the neighborhood just right around the corner, and I love this family, but I worry about rentals. I mean, nobody likes a bunch of rentals in their neighborhood, and historically, that rental properties bring the neighborhood down, you know, and their value down and everything. And while they are a great family, they may live in one part of the house, but they're going to have rentals all around them because they're going to own the house over here, and if they decide to just leave altogether and then they have a bunch of rentals right there, it's just not great for the neighborhood. So
How do you prevent people from renting out their houses, though?
right. Well, you don't.
Really can't.
But we're going to add another one. We're going to add 2 together on that, and then.
I don't see a big difference.
I do, just because I don't think rentals bring great things to a neighborhood.
I get your point. I get your point, but but how do you prevent people from renting their homes?
And how do you, well, by having it a single family dwelling home, you eliminate some of that issue, for some of those issues. When you have two families living in the same home that are totally separate, that creates more of an issue. That's why the whole ordinance is that it's a single family dwelling home. If you want to put a mother-in-law apartment on there, great,
That's essentially what that is.
right?
Yeah.
But then
But
leave
really,
it as
in the
mother-in-law,
neighborhoods where they have
then
these,
leave it zoned as mother-in-law. That it has to be the R1, it has to be a family member that lives there.
I'll
And
tell
then
you-
there's going to be less problems.
I'll tell you an experience in communities where they have these, it's not a problem. It really isn't a problem. They fit in very well in the neighborhood. So I don't see a big problem with them, but that's,
Well, and this is interesting in the sense that there's two legal lots, right? Isn't that what there's?
So, yeah, in this case, and that's part of the recommendation, is it used to be a legal lot. It can be recreated as a legal lot. It meets all the size and standards for that. And so it would be a new building on a new lot.
I think maybe more critical in my mind is some of the,
I'm sorry, do you want to
oh, sorry.
entertain more from her or have her go ahead and sit down? Okay,
no.
thank you.
No, yeah, thanks for the comment, yes.
Yeah. Just more critical in my mind is some of these issues have already been answered because this is a conditional use.
Yeah.
Right? Let's just remind ourselves what a conditional use is. The presumption is approval.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, let's deny this, and we get to have leeway whether we approve it or deny it. The question is, what are the impacts, and can we mitigate those? Right. And if we can mitigate them, we have to approve it. Right. We are required by law to approve it. So the question of whether we want this in this area kind of was answered a long time ago when the legislative decision was made to allow conditional uses of this sort in this area.
By allowing two family dwellings.
Right.
Yeah. In all of our residential zones.
Uh-huh, yeah. So
Yeah,
the conditions that we've identified are how could it affect the neighborhood, I suppose, and there are some conditions that I don't even know that we either A, can consider problems, or B, things that we can solve. And like Wilf was saying, is rental a detrimental impact? I don't know. In the abstract, I don't think it is.
And if it is, how do you stop it?
Right. So what condition can you impose? You can't say no rentals.
Right.
That's a legislative decision that we can't answer right now, at least.
Yeah.
In theory, this probably has constitutional issues, I don't know, but if you wanted to say no rentals in some certain zone, then that's a legislative decision. It's not for us to decide right now.
Yeah.
So we just look at what are the detrimental impacts and what are the conditions we can impose to address those, and I think we've done that.
But I really think that yeah. Oh.
I was just getting some air. Yes.
It's not just that it's a rental property, is if you've seen the lot, and I haven't seen any of this addressed so far, it already looks cramped with the old house really close to the neighbor on the west of them. And they're not gonna be able to use that whole new lot because there's power lines that are really low. And so they're also want to put like a rezone or permission to put this new one really close to the old house that's gonna be there. And the lot may go back far, but it's mostly drop off down into the gully. So it's gonna be really close to the sidewalk as well. So it's gonna just look really cramped. And it's just, most of the lots, they're not huge houses up in the neighborhood, but when we moved up there 18 years ago, it was because it was a nice single-family dwelling home. And there are other homes that they do rent out the whole home, and that's fine, but there's not, where are they gonna park? It's just, there's not, if you actually drive by and look at the lot, it's not, doesn't look big enough at all to even hold a house, let alone parking for the 3 families in the old house, 3 cars in the new house, and the 2 or 3 for the additional apartment on top. If it was like a mother-in-law apartment, they wouldn't need the 2-family code lift on it. They could just have it for when their family comes. It's the additional parking and the cramped space, the aesthetics that would affect things in the neighborhood as well. I have rental property, and I just think that there's certain areas that are better for it than others, and it's hard to find good renters. they look good on paper, but once they get in there and you find out they're crappy, there's not a lot you can do about them, and can create problems with neighbors and things as well. So it's not just that it's a rental property, because obviously people can rent out their property, but I think more people are upset that it's a rental and a house jammed together and another rental up on top of that. It's just going to look really crowded. It already looks crowded. So.
Thank you. So the setbacks and all that's met here, right? We're not
so
changing anything there.
This specific request wouldn't give any leniency or deviation from the required setbacks of the zone. The next item does talk a little bit about a side yard setback on that, so that's a separate consideration that, as mentioned, they are looking for specific to a side yard.
Okay, thank you. All right, I believe we had a motion and a second, and now we're waiting for the first vote.
Aye.
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 Okay. Let's see if I can get back to this. Next is a consideration of an exception or modification for distance between residential structures at 747 East Brookshire for Shane and Carrie Hughes.
Okay, so this is, again, the exact same property we were just discussing. This is the first time I've personally utilized this provision, so bear with me as we'll essentially read the ordinance with you so I don't interpret it incorrectly. But as alluded in some of the comments, and again, the property owners could speak a little more specifically as to their desire. There's some power lines along the east side of the property that run, let's see if we can find you a decent image. Run north and south on the east property line, to which our power company requires some separation and distance of at least 10 feet. So my pointer, well, I got one here. So this far east yellow line, essentially there's an overhead power line that runs through there. And so in part for that, and they've provided a letter describing their statement, they're hoping to move the house a little bit further to the west, so it's closer to the home that they now currently live in and own. The ordinance states in 1725-5 that the width of one side yard may be reduced or eliminated when authorized by the Planning Commission to a width of not less than 3 feet, provided the sum of the width of the two side yards is not less than the sum required minimum yards, and further provided the distance between the proposed dwelling and another dwelling, existing or proposed, on an adjacent lot is not less than the sum of the two side yards regularly required in this title. Such reduction may be authorized only when the Planning Commission finds it to be warranted by the location of the existing building or conducive to desirable development of two or more lots. So what that means to me, typically in an R18 zone, you have an 8-foot side yard, which means you're required at least 16 feet between houses as a minimum. So what it's saying is if we shifted it to the west, if there's still 16 feet between the home to the west of it, and we're not reducing that west side yard to less than 3 feet, then it meets at least the minimum standards of what this language is stating, should the Planning Commission find that that creates desirable and better development.
And it does do that?
And let me pull up the site plan, and I may have to
make sure I understand that we're just saying that if in effect you can move that center line over to allow some space, as long as the direct distance meets the standard. That's the exception we're talking about.
Yes, I believe, if I'm not catching it right. So I'll show you what they've done, and I've even explained it slightly different. So what they have here on the site plan, despite the copy, which I know is very difficult to see, is there's roughly 10 feet on the east side of the home between that home and the lot line. So it exceeds the 8 feet that's the minimum on the east side of the home. And actually, as proposed, what they show is a 10-foot side yard on the west side of the home. So the new home, both side yards would exceed the minimum 8-foot requirement. Where the reduction comes into place is on the existing house. It would be reduced below the 8 feet, I think, to a 6-foot side yard. So you would have 10 and 6, 16, same as 8 and 8, your minimum requirement. And I'll let the applicant explain it, but as it's been described to me and in the letter, one of the reasons they want a larger side yard here is to provide for parking alongside the new home, so a 10-foot space for a pad or parking site. They could have provided it if they were able to shift the home further to the east, but for the power line scenario. And so that's where they're asking 10 on the east, 10 on the west. The existing home would simply have the reduced side yard on that side, but still between buildings meet the 16 feet. Per your consideration, and I'm going to allow the applicant maybe to describe it further from there and give them their chance. The structure and the east side of this home is a covered patio. Am I explaining that correctly? On the west or the east side of the existing house. I'll come to the aerial image so we can look at it together, and if you want me to get in on Google Earth, and we can do that as well. So the far east end of this house, you can see it's a little bit smaller. It has a covered patio. The posts on that patio meet that distance requirement. There is an overhang on the roof. Typical eave we allow to go within a setback, roughly about 2 feet. So almost everybody's house, we measure setback to the foundation wall. And then if you've got any overhang on your roof, that's going in the setback as a typical projection. So I believe that with that distance, if it's post to building, they meet the 16 feet between structure requirement that the ordinance is speaking of. So,
But it requires the exception, right? I mean, that's
it requires the exception because we've reduced the existing home's eastern side yard setback.
where this new boundary is going to be drawn, is that?
Correct. So
Is a lot of this, I mean, is part of the reason for this because of the power line restriction?
I believe so, and they can speak to it further. So they want to have this RV pad on the west side of the new home.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay.
And they could have provided for that if they were able to shift the home further to the east, if the power line wasn't in the way. But because there's a power line, they can't provide for it on its own within the lot, and so they're sort of taking from themselves on their existing property. So from the street, much of it would be the same. There's 16 feet between buildings. The layman driving down the street wouldn't notice any difference. On paper, on the plat, on a site plan, it looks slightly different, and that's, I believe, why the ordinance says if you still have 16 feet between buildings, then it's something that can be considered. So,
But if there are fences in place, you'd see that, right? I mean, if there was
that's a good
something-
point. Yeah, a fence could show that, and I suppose that depends how the fence is put into place. If it's a straight fence between homes, you don't know where the lateral fence is going. But yes, that's if one home has a fence and the other one doesn't, or in this case, you'll have an RV pad, likely that goes up probably to an existing fence. So you could probably see a few feet of difference. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
Can I speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, there is no Shane Hughes. Sorry, I'm a little bit late traveling for work, but currently there's no existing fence on the east side of our current residence.
You started off by saying there is no Shane Hughes, and I thought, what?
Well, I apologize.
I know, we're good. I got
I've
you
been
now.
flying all day.
I'm a little tired, so it took me a while.
He exists. He's standing right there.
I know, that's what I'm saying. This is crazy.
Talk to my wife. Sometimes she doesn't want me to exist. So. But yeah, currently there's no fence on the east side of our property. And as Lyle mentioned, from the lot line, the original lot line of lot 245, if we reverted it back to that original lot line, there would be about 6.5 feet from that original lot line to the 3 4x4 posts that currently exist in our covered patio. There is some flat work there, meaning there's a cement patio there that probably sticks out a good 6 to 8 inches to the east from those posts, but it's just a covered patio there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I will confess that at my very first glance, when I read basically the agenda item and not much else, I thought, why is this not a variance? And I think the answer to that, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, is because it actually provides, there is an ordinance that provides for us to make exceptions outside of the realm of a variance.
Yeah, I thought the same thing.
Yeah, the ordinance actually allows for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. It essentially grants us the administrative ability, decision-making power
Yeah.
on this. Yeah. Okay.
I think what would help me the most would be to see a side view, I mean a street front view of this.
Can you pull up Google?
Because as I looked at these two
That's what we were asking
items,
about before.
As I look at these two items, the first item I didn't have a problem with. The second item I'm concerned about because I do think, and she's gone now, brought up this question about how cluttered it looks. That's the concern I have. Is from the front, it's going to look like it's wedged in
the
there.
lot.
It was, as the picture showed, the lot is as big as any, as either of those neighbors. It's as big as either of theirs, and the house is not going to be much bigger than either of their homes either. And the setback is going to be, again, just like their homes. It's the setback from the sidewalk, the front sidewalk is going to be a combination of the average of the two houses on either side. So the setback issues, the one on the west side is the bigger concern, I get that. But as far as looking crowded, it is, I mean, that it was an original plot land, so they're used to having this open space. But that's the only open space in the entire neighborhood. All of the houses are, like that, and it will be right in line with the rest of the houses as far as all the setbacks, other than that one side.
Lyle, can you go one more click east to show the power line?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's the overhead, and that's essentially the property line. So this white shed building that you can see in the picture would go away, and portions of the house would be on that.
So the line will come right up about to the driveway? Pretty close?
Yeah, the eastern wall of the new structure will be in here.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it.
And the garage would be on the west side of that new lot.
Yeah.
And the distance from essentially the west side of the garage to that covered patio, I think in the site plan it's about 15 feet, 1 inch, something like that. So it would actually be almost twice the distance than on the west side of our current home right there. So I really personally don't think that would be a concern, that it would look cramped there, just because it would be twice that distance.
Yeah.
So you'll move it over twice, okay.
Yeah.
Away from
and,
that house.
If you see on Stony Brook, our neighbor on the corner to the east of their Lyle, if you go to the east, her house is right on the corner, so we would have, I don't know, 40 feet, 35 feet from the proposed home to her current residence.
All this
Does that
space.
make sense? So
Yeah.
it's actually
quite a bit.
huge there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's not.
So yeah,
it's not-
I guess the concern that it would look cramped and, reduce the value of the neighborhood, I don't really see that personally, based on the existing structures in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Probably thinking we're trying to put the biggest house we can in a small spot, and it's only 1,400 square feet.
It's actually less than 1,300.
Yeah, I mean,
Per
not
floor.
including the garage, but our
Yeah.
floor, the main living area is only 1,300 square feet.
And our existing home is 1,000 square feet per floor, so it's not going to be a big home. We don't want to build beyond the neighborhood, right?
Exactly.
It's just not financially feasible. So I personally don't see it, but people can have their own opinions. It's in our best interest to make the neighborhood look fantastic, right? Our kids go to school there. We plan on keeping this home and our existing home for the next 30 years, 35 years, whatever. So it's in our best interest to make it look good. So I would argue that it would increase the values of the current homes in the neighborhood.
I just jump on that pile. I've actually personally evolved on this. I don't, generally speaking, think that it should be the role of municipal government to regulate aesthetics. One of the main reasons why is because that is so subjective. And I think the concerns that I've heard over being too tight or too crammed in there are not born out of a worry that, you know, we need to separate homes to protect from fire, you know, or whatever other justifications for why we have setbacks aside from aesthetics. The reasons why those comments have been made is because it's an aesthetic concern, and that's increasingly falling on these deaf ears. And I totally agree. I don't know who owns this home, but in the Google Earth map, if this home gets built, it's going to upgrade this whole street. No offense to whoever lives there. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, I don't like the aesthetic argument necessarily, and I think we've already addressed the other concerns on the conditional use side of it, and this setback thing is not a big concern to me.
I've just looked at this. I don't really see the concern. I don't see that there's a problem doing this.
Yeah.
I think the neighbor's bigger concern was that it's a rental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, as you might imagine, I find patently offensive.
I have to apologize for arguing with her a little bit, but I have, you know, spent so much of my career listening to people say renters are bad, and I'm just like, all of us have been renters at one point in our lives, you know, and it's.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That is just an overgeneralization stereotype that is entirely born of anecdotal evidence that usually shouldn't even be an anecdote. Yeah. So.
With that being said, do we have a motion?
Yes, I want one.
Do we make a motion that we consider an exception?
Are we
just
granting
granting
it?
it?
Granted,
Okay.
don't we, Lyle?
So, yeah, so I think you would motion to grant it, and I think you'd want to be fairly specific as to how much latitude you allow, so that they pretty much only need 1.5 feet of variation on that lot line to make it work. But I believe that perhaps you're willing to be open-ended if for some reason the lot comes as close as 3 feet, but they still keep the 2 feet, or 16 feet between buildings. Perhaps you're okay with allowing the exception all the way up to 3 feet on that western home.
Lyle, can I jump in there as
Please.
well? That's perfect, because we're still working with our architect engineers to try to finalize the site plan. And I've been doing some Pythagorean theorem on trying to identify exactly where can we put our home, especially on the east side where the power lines are, because in working with Kaysville Power, it has to be 10-foot radius from the peak of our home. So we're still trying to play with our engineers and trying to play with the plans to identify exactly where it needs to be. So it may be 6 inches over, it may be over, we may be able to get a little bit closer to those power lines, so we may actually have a little bit more room on that side, but it's not 100% finalized yet. And that was my biggest concern coming in tonight, is that our engineers are not 100% complete with the site plan. So, sorry.
No, appreciate that.
All right, well, I'll make a motion that we grant an exception regarding the distance between the two structures for Shane and Carrie Hughes at 747 East Brookshire Drive, with the distance, the side yard required distance of not less than 3 feet for the existing building and not less than 16 feet between the two buildings. Hopefully that made sense.
That's very clear, I think.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Aye. Is it my turn?
Yes.
Aye.
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 Congratulations.
Good luck.
Yeah, so the planning commission is the final deciding body on this one per the ordinance, so this is your last stop on both of these items.
Get your shovels, start digging.
Well, get your permit.
Oh, yeah, that too.
I saw it go dark and I thought, well, that was pretty good timing. My power went out right when that motion passed.
Good timing.
Battery zapped. Okay, I'm just gonna guess that next on the agenda is a call to the public. Is there any public that wants to be called?
Looks like it's leaving.
Okay, next on the agenda, again, just going by memory, is gonna be calendar, reports, and correspondence.
So I have a quick question for Lyle before we get off on this. Lyle, remind me, does our ordinance allow for ADUs?
It does not. So
That's
where
why-
we
that's
see
why
them a lot, or
that's why-
sort of as was stated within the concern, the true mother-in-laws. So
Yeah.
we'll have a lot of second kitchens and spaces within homes that are very separate and independent. But as long as it's family living in there, then it still meets our single-family definition. But yes, ADUs, whether detached or attached, other than just as you stated, unless we define it and call it a two-family dwelling, and through this conditional use process, are not permitted currently. So I believe that it could be something that spurs out of SB 34 and something of consideration and interest to the city.
You have to, I mean, this year we're going to be required to redo our moderate income housing plan, and one of the options is to allow for ADUs. I really would strongly encourage the city to look at it. It's a good option.
We get a lot of interest in our office where we have a lot of large lots in town. Here in this area, for example, we have a lot of narrow but very deep lots of people who are interested in doing things behind their home. So you have a detached accessory dwelling unit that could be a solution for Kaysville, and I don't believe everybody would do it, but there's certainly interest in the community to do that. And you have got our half acres west of the freeway where I hear that occasionally are acre lots, and so yeah, that could be something to consider. Then there's these attached accessory dwelling units, basement or over garage apartments, and so we could craft an ordinance to deal with one, both, one or the other, just whatever we want. And you'll see a lot of size limitations to make sure it is accessory, not just a second mansion house in the backyard or something like that. And occupancy could be a portion of it. So yeah, something to think about. And if that's of interest with the commission, we could do some trainings or research together on approaching that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, now, correspondence, reports.
Yes, so just very brief. 2 weeks again, we'll have, I think, quite the agenda again. On the 23rd, I think, is the next meeting. So I believe the Ogden Clinic rezone will be probably prepared to come back. I think we've got some others. Perhaps it's just that is the big one, but that'll be back.
Can we just rezone all of Second North in one big meeting?
Big foul swoop.
Be done with it?
That's what we're gonna do, in my advice. With the general plan map, we say these is where we want certain things to go.
Oh, yeah.
And we already made this decision, so.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah. So where are we at on our general plan update and the visioning thing and the whole, what's happening?
Yeah, so currently, it's been kind of a weird juggling act for me, but we have an active strategic planning process going right now. So we have a consultant, the Langdon Group, that's helping with us with that specific process. And it's going to do some visioning. I think it's kind of becoming more comprehensive than a traditional strategic plan as I look at it, that'll answer some of those questions. And then dovetailing on the back end of that, I don't know the exact timing, but I'm expecting perhaps fall. We received grant money from WFRC to update our general plan. We should be able to do a pretty robust process, and so that's when I'm expecting likely that'll take place and really get into the crux of that. So we're doing some community vision and input on, and land use will be some of that with the strategic plan, general plan shortly to follow, where we really get into the weeds. Housing and the like will be addressed.
Great.
So yeah, keep an eye out for that. 23rd, I've sent out an email. I've heard from some of you on the 18th of May, so in just a couple weeks. It's a Saturday morning. There's a training opportunity if anyone is interested on the SB 34, which is the affordable housing legislation that just went through. If you're interested in attending, let me know. They're broadcasting it over at Utah State here in Kaysville, so you don't have to travel too far to see it. and it's free, so we can easily get anyone involved that's interested.
Those slides are usually posted, right? Or the information, don't they post them on
The trainings.
the trainings?
So the league will often post them. Luau is the main organization that puts it on, and Wilf could correct me on that, but the Land Use Academy of Utah, the Utah chapter of the APA, and so they'll constantly push out, and you can watch for their training opportunities. We'll try and keep you informed when I see them. Sometimes I miss them, and I'll hear from, in this case, Councilmember DeCare saw it before I did. So if you see something that you're interested in and you think other commissioners maybe, let me know. I'll try and do the same as I see things, push it out, but you could also watch those organizations. Other than that, unless there's correspondence from the commission or questions,
Let's take a motion to adjourn. Gary?
You guys really want to leave?
It's 9:30.
So moved.
Thank you.